I'd like to invite our MD and CEO, Mr. Vikram Limaye, to deliver the inaugural speech for release of integrated guide on BRSR and provide his valuable insights on the topic.
Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this event where we are releasing an integrated guide to the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. We're delighted to have with us today Mr. J.N. Gupta, Conrad, Ms. Diksha Vats, PK, CIOs, CFOs, CSs of top NSE listed companies and mutual fund houses. In India, ESG concerns were brought to the forefront in July 2011 when the Ministry of Corporate Affairs released national voluntary guidelines on social, environmental, and economic responsibilities of businesses. Consequently, SEBI introduced the BRR in 2012 and then in 2021 became the leading regulator to replace BRR with BRSR. In today's times, accountable capital formation is critical. BRSR aims at comprehensive disclosures by companies in India, enabling prompt quantification and scrutiny of various ESG parameters across different sectors and companies. The integrated report covers parameters for 38 industries and is intended as a comprehensive guide. In 2020, NSE along with SES released a report titled ESG Analysis on 50 listed companies in India. So we did this report with Mr. Gupta a couple of years ago. The report studied ESG practices across 50 listed companies in 12 different sectors and provided a summary on the ESG footprint of selected NSE listed companies. Additionally, it provided investors with a tool to benchmark companies. The study was also intended to act as a catalyst to encourage companies to follow better ESG practices. Another step towards this goal is the release of this integrated report. We will have a presentation from SES and a panel discussion, which I'm sure everyone will find very engaging and insightful. Once again, I thank you very much for attending this function, this event, and for taking the time to be part of this. Thank you very much.
I'd request MD sir to stay back on the dais, please. Now I'd invite Mr. J.N.G. Gupta, founder and MD, Stakeholder Empowerment Service, on the dais, please. Mr. J.N.G. Gupta has over 43 years of diversified professional experience in public and private sector, including 2 terms with SEBI. Mr. Gupta is a B.Tech in Electrical Engineering from IIT Kanpur, CAIIB and CFA. Mr. Gupta started his career with BHEL and later worked with SBI, Indo-Gulf Fertilizers and Grasim. In 1994, Mr. Gupta joined SEBI as Division Chief of Primary and Secondary Market. He rejoined SEBI in July 2009 as Executive Director for 2-year term and oversaw market regulations, surveillance derivatives and new products department. He was a member secretary of the committee headed by Dr. Bimal Jalan, former RBI governor, to review market infrastructure institutions. Mr. Gupta is also a member of SEBI Primary Market Advisory Committee. I'd request MD sir to please present the bouquet to J.N.G. sir. I'd now request J.N.G. sir and MD sir to release the integrated guide on BRSR.
My presentation will be done by a friend, but I have to speak. Okay.
Just one.
You have to just push this thing.
Yeah.
Release
that he. Okay. Release. Which one? This page down.
The below. Thank you, MD sir. I'd request GNG sir and team to share their comprehension on BRSR and the guides released today. Please. Shall I
Yeah, you
open
can
the
start
PPT?
this. He will start, but I will. A very good evening to everybody. And I would start first saying a big thank you to NSE, without whose support neither me would have been here nor this guide would have been here. So big thank you to NSE. And as Jareen was saying, SEBI BRR to BRSR. Now there is only just one letter added, S. But this one letter has made a lot of difference from a 3-page disclosure to 40-page disclosure. So the S is a sumptuous meal that has been delivered by SEBI to all of you, and you got to consume it and relish. Now the question is this: why SES has done this and why it is doing? It has two objectives. The first objective is very simple, that SES has been established with a mission to improve governance. The second objective is this, that by my experience I find that there is always a reluctance to change. And reluctance to change comes because it looks like a big elephant is there and how to tackle that elephant. So if somebody guides you to parts of the elephant and which you feel that, oh, these are child's play, then probably it becomes a easier thing. So with that objective, SES has done it. And now how SES has done it, don't ask me, because my team has been working, at least 7 or 8 people have been working for last 6 months, day in, day out, because of the enormity of the work that they have done. If you look at the guides, each guide is around 140 page. And we have done it for 38 sectors. We have mapped it with SEBI 1st April 2022 circular, where there are about 180 industry classification. So we have mapped the guide to SASB 38 sector, then 180 industry classification. Not only that, each points of SEBI BRSR have been mapped with different global standards: GRI, SDG, CDP, TCFD, and SASB. But we have not stopped, because we believe that the compliance with BRSR alone is not sufficient. Not every company who wants to be the leader would be happy with mere compliance. So we have added leadership indicators beyond what SEBI has mandated. And our experience of last 10 years of working in the field and 4 years doing ESG reports. So we have added parameters which we feel are important, which are going to be important in times to come. And the other thing is this: a question would be asked that why we have not mapped it with various other standards, say for example, Dow Jones Index. Now, I had a word with my team and they said, sir, as it is itna raita phaila hua hai, then if we add DJIL, so there are more than 500 and 600 parameters. If I put that, so then probably this project will not move forward. It will frighten people so much, because if you give a 300-page document, so it will be foolish. So we said, okay. The other thing is this: if all of you have been following what is happening in the ESG world, every other day something new is happening. And in that context, I would say that the guides that we have prepared is not like Qutub Minar. They are not going to be stationary. Every time a change is going to come, we are going to incorporate those changes. So we will create version after version, and maybe we will decide that every 15 days or every 30 days we will update the guides, so that you are not looking into the history, you are looking into the present. Then how it is going to help corporates? That is the other question. The first answer is that on one page or one place you get everything that you do. The second thing is that it will save you from all those so-called experts who are advertising today, that trained BRSR experts and company people. Because I don't know, except 4 or 5 companies, no other company has published BRSR. HDFC is one which had published last year and this year also. Tata still has done this year. So it is a question that how do we create experts who have not done anything? So what will happen? People will come to corporation and say, we are expert in BRSR and give me the job and we'll prepare this. So we said, let us cut down all this and give a product to the company which is comprehensive, and if the company wants to use it, they will be able to. The other thing is it is very economical. As far as the guides are concerned, will be available free. I hope NSE is not going to charge and we are not going to charge. So this will be available free of cost to anybody to log in, just register for login and take this BRSR and use this BRSR. And is this the end? No, we are not doing an end. We are further developing a online e-BRSR portal where companies will be able to make a BRSR online. That is going to be, my team will show you a little bit on that. It is work in progress. There we are giving all sorts of flexibility. In the first, you can choose which sector you want to do as per SASB or as per SEBI. Then it will show you only that portion. Then it will show whether you want to do it for subsidiary or for consolidated or division-wise or location-wise. It will give you all the flexibility. Then when you come to the question, it will tell you which are the relevant standards for this particular question or this item and what does that relevant regulation say. So when you click on the I field, it will give you a box which will tell you something. It is going to tell you what information is required, how to fill it. Beyond that, we are going to say that if you decide to do it in a subsidiary wise, it will be able to aggregate all the information and give you a consolidated thing. If you want to do it division wise, so whatever choice is there. But again, I warn, since this will be a new product, there will be initial, because we say that we as a technical people may design 100 things, but it is the user which will know that where the shoe pinches. So it is only after the user uses and then we will know where is the problem and how to rectify it. But our objective is that we should give a product to the companies where their elephant becomes a mouse. Using the mouse of the computer, you can create your BRSR report. Of course, you will have to do the background work because the data will not be created here. Data will come from your information. So you will have to have a MIS system which will create the data. With that, again, like all CEOs, I am CEO of my company and I don't do work, so my colleague will do the work. Thank you. I invite Navneet.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Navneet Desai, and I'll be taking you through the features of the integrated guides, apart from introducing you on how to interpret these guides in the first place and how they can be useful to you. But first, allow me to briefly set the context as to the need for switch from BRR to BRSR, especially in the light of fast evolving global regulatory framework, a landscape regarding ESG investing. So, as stated earlier, last year at the 26th Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, India for the first time, actually finally, pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2070. Further, it also committed to enhance nationally determined contributions targets to be achieved by 2030. Now, these contributions, these commitments are actually quite significant, and the government alone cannot shoulder the burden of, you can say, meeting such commitments. Now, India Inc. also bears the responsibility to help the government to meet these targets. But first, in order to understand the enormity of this task, the industry first needs to analyze as to where it is currently before embarking on this journey of transition. So here is where BRSR comes into the picture. Now, till you can say it was 2012 for the first time where BRR was mandated by SEBI for the first 100 listed entities. And since then, now recently almost 1,000 companies are publishing BRSR in the annual reports. And this year is going to be a transition year where you have a choice between BRR and BRSR. And from next year onwards, you're going to be publishing BRSR as a mandatory compliance requirement. So why are the other reasons for the switch to BRSR? I'd like to say that the need for standardized disclosures on topics relevant and material to local demographics. If you look at it globally, global investors are currently focusing on consistent, comparable, and reliable sustainability data. Now, that is the need of the hour, and that is what the investors are looking at. And in that regard, BRSR ticks, at least is the first step to ticking those boxes. Now, that is one of the reasons for the switch to BRSR. And if I were to elaborate on this topic about local demographics, I'll start off by talking about this concept called just transition in the journey to net zero. Now, if we were to look at this term as just transition, you can understand it by looking at it that the transition needs to happen in a fair, just, equitable manner, which is inclusive of all stakeholders. And you need to look at the local demographics. When I say local demographics, you need to understand what the local challenges are, what the local opportunities would be, before setting the goals and targets to transition to net zero. Now, what is the current problem that at least the Indian listed entities would be facing? Because they are actually straitjacketing global reporting requirements. These are Western concepts. They are incorporating them into the Indian scenario without adapting to the local scenario. This is something that even the entities are facing, this issue, you can say. And how does the BRR compliance alleviate this problem to a certain extent? It starts off by helping you to report on topics that are relevant and material to the Indian scenario by customizing global reporting requirements to local needs. That is what BRSR intends. And coming to the global reporting frameworks, BRSR is actually intended to be a regulation to integrate them all. If you were to look at the global reporting frameworks, it's an alphabet soup of those reporting frameworks. You have the GRI standards, SASB, then GRI is actually quite huge in scale. It focuses more on scale. It covers a lot of the topics. SASB is actually sector specific. TCFD and CDP are climate based, and they are quite dealing in depth about them. SDG is about meeting those targets by 2030. And the rest are either, you can say, overlapping with the first 5, or in development stage, or region specific. But overall, the current problem might, from what I understand, is entities might be facing when they are reporting based on global reporting frameworks. They are covering or aligning themselves with at least 2 of such, maybe sometimes even 3 reporting frameworks. Now, that is a compliance burden for you. But if you were to replace it with BRSR, you have just 1, and that helps you. So BRSR compliance is essentially an attempt to incorporate global best practices, incorporated, designed and localized to what the local requirements require. Now, coming to the challenges that listed entities are facing, you can say dilemmas, you can say challenges, whatever you want to call them. We have tried to categorize them into 3 buckets, you can call them. There are entities which have recently started reporting on BRR, or some have not even started it. For them, BRSR is totally an alien concept. That is the issue that they are facing. And you have entities which are just disclosing on BRR, and that too for many years. Now, if they were to switch or transition to BRSR, they will be very unfamiliar with some of the newly introduced parameters. For them, a bit of guidance would be required. And for the entities that are already disclosing via an integrated report or a separate sustainability report, which are mapped to global reporting frameworks, BRSR is essentially an additional compliance burden, which must be completed within the first 6 months of the succeeding financial year, rendering the sustainability reports, separate sustainability reports that some of the entities are releasing, say maybe 9 months or 12 months down the line after the completion of the financial year. So those reports would be essentially rendered obsolete, because you have to disclose these BRSR disclosures as part of your annual report, which must be released before the AGM, which needs to happen before September. So it's all an additional compliance burden. So how do these integrated guides by us come into the picture? So these integrated guides are designed to be a one-stop solution, and they are intended to solve the issues or challenges of all 3 categories. And I'll go step by step. for the ones who are currently not disclosing BRR or who have just started disclosing on BRR, for them, these guides explain each and every BRSR parameter thoroughly. Its objective, each and every BRSR parameter's objective for disclosure, guidance on how to measure that disclosure in the first place, and how to measure and how to disclose. Yeah, that's what I covered. And for the ones that are already disclosing BRR, these guides are intended as additional disclosure guidance for leadership indicators on the lines of global best practices. So if they want to extend or look at leadership indicators as per global best practices, it helps them as well. But for the ones that are already disclosing via an integrated report, for them, each and every parameter is mapped to the GRI standard, SDG target, TCFD recommendation, CDP question, and those CDP questions can be sector specific as well, and the SASB accounting metric, which are again sector specific. Now, the guidance on disclosures for additional parameters have also been actually based on our analysis. We have a proprietary ESG model as well. So we looked at those parameters and we decided that some of these parameters needed additional guidance, and based on our experience of developing that model, we have included some suggestions as well in those guides. Now, lastly, these BRSR reporting guides are specifically tailored for 38 subsectors as per SASB, and every guide is also mapped to indicate the industries covered by it as per the SEBI's industry classification system. Now, elaborating on the last point, I'd like you all to have a look at this. Now, this is basically, you can say that as per SASB, you have 38 subsectors, which can be aggregated into 11 major sectors. So on the top left, you have consumer goods, and it has 3 subsectors. Then you have extractive minerals, which has 4 subsectors. Then you have food and beverage at the right. It has 5 subsectors. Similarly, healthcare, then transportation, renewable resources. You have technology management, consumer services, resource transformation, finance, and infrastructure. So 11 major sectors are divided into 38 subsectors as per SASB, which are further subdivided into 77 industries. So what we have done is we have created 38 guides which incorporate guidance for 77 industries. Accordingly, whichever industry fits into those guides, they have been provided over here. And then with respect to the sectoral mapping to SEBI, now this is just an example, one of the examples, a sectoral mapping example for metals and mining. On the left-hand side, you see that this has been mapped as per the SASB Sustainable Industry Classification System. So over here, you have metals and mining, you have the SASB subsector code, followed by the industries that are covered as per SASB, and those are 2 sectors. And this is basically a top-down approach, whereas on the right-hand side, you have the SEBI's industry classification system, which is basically a bottom-up approach, where we are actually mapping what the basic industries are. So each and every listed entity will have a basic industry code assigned to them post that industry classification. So you can just cross-reference it with that specific guide and accordingly choose which guide you have to refer to. And then you have the industries that are covered, the sector and the macroeconomic sector. So that is one of those examples as to how we have done the sectoral mapping for each and every guide. Now, coming to the format of the integrated BRSR guides, bear with me, it might look a bit complex at the start, but let's break it down into parts. Looking at the first part, you have on the first line the section. So BRSR essentially has 3 sections. The first is with respect to, you can say, general disclosures. The second section, section B, has policy disclosures, and section C is principle-wise disclosures. So you have the first line which tells you what that it is covering. The second line is basically an essential or a leadership indicator guide. So basically, once you come to section C, you'll have each principle-wise, you'll have a set of questions that have essential indicators and a set of questions which will have leadership indicators. So it will tell you exactly which parameter you're looking at. So over here, you're looking at parameter number 24 of, you can say, section A for the matter. And then you have a format for objective, where we briefly tell you as to what the objective is behind such disclosure, as to how it will help you if you were to disclose it. And then we come to how to measure that parameter, then how to disclose that parameter. And then this parameter is actually mapped to 5 global reporting frameworks. That is the GRI standard disclosure, SDG target, the TCFD recommendation, CDP question, and lastly, the SASB sector-specific accounting metric. And once those mappings are done, the detailed disclosure follows below. So if those numbers are written over there on the right, the details have been provided below. And lastly, you have these boxes. You have 3 boxes, and the first 2 are sector-specific. So whichever sector you are referring to, the blue ones are basically as per the SASB standard, and these are specific accounting metrics. So whatever that number over there on the right, SASB metric would be telling you, you'll have that detail over here. So you'll have a material topic that you need to disclose about. Then the accounting metric is basically manner of disclosure, whether that disclosure type is quantitative or subjective. It will tell you that, and the unit of measure that you need to disclose it for that sector. Going below, you have the disclosures as per GRI, and these are sector specific again. But for GRI, there are only currently 2 sector specific standards. They are oil and gas and coal. For them, we have those sector specific standards. And lastly, we have something called as recommended additional general disclosures as per SES. Now, this is as per our proprietary ESG model. Now, here what we tell you is what the parameter is, the manner of disclosure that is expected as per BRSR, and what the best practices are, and how you can disclose them, along with the materiality for that specific sector. So let's take an example, because this is quite difficult to digest for a second. So let's take an example. Now here we have principle 6 and parameter 3. So it relates to disclosures on water. So this is basically what is expected out of the BRSR. This is the BRSR format. It will ask you to disclose it in this format. So if this is the format that you need to disclose on, if you refer to the integrated guide, since it's a bit comprehensive guide, I'll make it a bit easy. First, you go to principle 6, you'll find that post that principle, you have all the relevant SDGs that are mapped, that are relevant to this principle. Thank you. And then then this guide will briefly tell you about the objective behind this disclosure. And then you come to the essential indicators. So here we have parameter number 3, that's relating to water withdrawal. So then it will give you what the brief overview is. Then you'll see that you have how to measure and how to disclose. So here it will even tell you what the formulas that are expected, the standard formulas that are as part of the BRSR reporting format, and the guide as per what SEBI has recommended. And then it will tell you how to disclose it and what are the things that you need to focus on while disclosing. Then it will tell you what are the connections for that parameter to each and every global reporting framework. Sorry, just a second. So you have GRI, SDG, TCFD, CDP, and SASB. Once these mappings are done, it will give you a brief additional guidance on each and every global reporting framework. So again, GRI, SDG, TCFD, SASB. And lastly, for this parameter, you have something called as sector specific. Now this is for, I picked the oil and gas sector over here. So what is expected out of oil and gas? For oil and gas sector, you have the material topic and what are the accounting metrics that are relevant for oil and gas sector for this parameter. These are highlighted here. And what's the category of disclosure? So again, all these are quantitative in nature, and what is the unit of measurement that is required. So these are essentially as per what is expected at the global level. But sometimes you need to customize them to the local needs as well. So herein comes what SES is recommending in the next box. So what is expected out of you and what the best practices are. And again, we have another note over here. This note is basically when water disclosures are to be expected, you are expected to disclose them in an absolute number format and an intensity format. Now, for the intensity format, the BRSR is expecting you to disclose on a per rupee turnover basis. Now, but we at SES, through our experience, have seen that if those intensity disclosures are on a per rupee turnover basis, you are missing one important element. These are affected by inflationary trends. Now, when I say that, take metals and mining, for example. If the cost with respect to metals and mining increases, accordingly it affects the revenue. And if you're having an intensity which is based on per rupee turnover basis, that's revenue is your denominator over here. So without doing anything, your intensity is affected by inflationary trends. So that is something that can be a bit confusing. So we recommend that instead of having a per rupee turnover basis as an intensity parameter, you can take it as based on production volumes or sale volumes. That is something that can be a bit more relevant, and you can check it over the years as well. So that can be something that can be done. So this is just one of those examples. Moving forward, access to listed entities. Now, again, these will be available both on the NSE website as well as SES website in PDF format, free of cost. And these are actually dynamic in nature in the sense that these will be regularly updated, and you'll have versions as to which you want to refer to. And the second aspect of these guidelines would be they are also available on the SES integrated BRSR tool that is under development. I'll just quickly run you through that. Just a sec. I won't take much of your time. I'll just present you exactly what sir was highlighting. I'll briefly take you through that. So it's just an online tool that is, okay. So I'll just talk you through the features before I very briefly show it to you. So what are the features? As sir stated, you'll have multiple user access control, and that will be based on where the units or your business entities or at your subsidiary level, everyone can parallelly fill that data, and it can be assimilated, consolidated, and compiled, and the user will have a master access control. And based on whatever data is filled, all you need to do is click on export, and once you click on that export, you'll have an option to either export it in a Word format or an XBRL format once the taxonomy is released. And once that is released, you'll have also the option of preloading previous year's data as well. So you can have a quantifiable data comparison with previous year's information to get an idea about the improvement. And lastly, the data is stored on a cloud server, and alternatively, it can be made to be such that the data is stored on the company server as well. So these are the features of the integrated BRSR tool. So this essentially is what the tool looks like, and if I were to jump to principle 6, I'll quickly. How it will help you is basically each and every parameter has an I button. So if you were to look at the guide is a 140-page guide for on an average for each and every sector, and there are 38 sectors. Now, if you need guidance for one such parameter, you'll have to go looking at that guide. Instead, here you can look at exactly which okay, it's not working currently, but here this I is supposed to give you that guidance on that parameter itself, and along with the best practice which currently any listed entity is following. If those examples are provided over here as a reference, then you fill in this data. This is as per pure BRSR format, and you can have multiple users filling in from multiple units, and you can aggregate it, assimilate it, and at the end you can just click on download Word file, and once a taxonomy is released for XBRL, you can even just download that XBRL document once you are happy with it, and you can submit it. So it's that simple. So if in future, if you want to disclose it on a quarterly basis, if it does happen in that fashion, if it's something that you want to control yourself, so that is something that will help you in the future. So this is, from our side, a brief introduction on what these integrated guides do, and I hope that you'll find them useful and you'll be using them. So thank you once again. Oh, currently this parameter, it's Okay, principle 1. So yeah, so this is something that you'll get, and it will be specific for that parameter itself. So this is from our side, and I hope you'll find the integrated guides useful. So thank you once again.
Thank you, GNG sir and team, for sharing with us your insights on the topic. Now, moving on to the next session, we have a panel discussion followed by Q&A session. I now request Mr. Tirthankar Patnaik, Chief Economist at NSE, who is also a moderator for today's panel discussion, to please come on the dais and set the ball rolling. Mr. Tirthankar Patnaik has over 2 decades of experience in the Indian capital markets, academic research, credit research in macro and sector strategy, quantitative finance and consumer banking. He has a PhD where his area of research was high frequency finance and micro structure.
Hi, good evening. I promise to make the, it's okay if I keep sitting when I speak, right? And am I audible? BRSR will not have teething troubles like this, I'm very sure. I also promised to make it a little simpler than what we saw there. It was complicated for me, honestly. So let me just invite my fellow panelists onto the dais, please. I'll start with the lady, Ms. Diksha Vats. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Aditya Birla Group. While she comes, let me just introduce her. So Diksha is a sustainability professional with over 27 years of experience in consulting and corporate setups. At the Aditya Birla Group, she drives the sustainability business transformation agenda across all its locations on strategic, operational, communication and advocacy aspects. Earlier at Hindalco, she worked across geographies, functions and aspects towards mainstreaming sustainability in the business on climate change, energy transition, water, waste, emissions and biodiversity. Prior to joining Aditya Birla Group, Diksha led the sustainability and climate change practice at PwC at their Mumbai office for over 8 years, a regular speaker, panelist at sustainability events. She has been at the forefront of the sustainability agenda in India through participation in several working groups, industry bodies and expert networks. Welcome, Diksha. My second panelist is Mr. Conrad D'Souza. Mr. D'Souza, please. Mr. D'Souza is a member of the executive management and he's the Chief of Investor Relations at HDFC. He has a master's degree in commerce, a master's degree in business administration, and is a senior executive program graduate of the London Business School. He joined HDFC India in, this is a pregnant pause, 1984. He's currently a member of the executive management there, and he was earlier the treasurer of HDFC. He has been a consultant to multilateral agencies and has undertaken assignments in Asia, Africa and Eastern Europe. He is an independent director on 3 Indian companies boards and a commercial bank in Sri Lanka. Welcome, Mr. D'Souza. Last but certainly not the least, allow me to invite Mr. Parvatisam Kanchinadam, affectionately called PK. PK is currently the Corporate Secretary and Chief Legal Officer at Tata Steel. Prior to joining the Tata Group, PK served as the Corporate Secretary and the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer of Infosys. He also serves as a member of the CII National Committee on Financial Reporting and on the CII National Committee on Regulatory Affairs. PK holds a Master's of Law degree from Stanford and an MBA from Sloan at MIT. And he is also an associate member of the ICSI. Welcome, PK. And this panel discussion will certainly be incomplete if I do not call the CEO doesn't work. Please, sir. So without much ado, let me go quickly to the questions to my fellow panelists. I will start with you, sir. So this is, I'm going to ask you on the regulatory evolution in sustainability reporting. We have seen how Navneet spoke about, we moved from, BRR to now BRSR, is this transition. So it has been briefly touched upon in the presentation as well. But why was there the need? to shift to BRSR, and what is the objective of, how is the objective of BRSR different from BRR? And how do you see this framework evolving in a couple of years?
We have two choices in life, either to live in a well, totally oblivious of the fact that what is happening around us, or come out of the well and see what is happening. So, if you see last 10, 15 years, ESG has been, as the word ESG has been spoken more often than anything else in the world, and no political statement by any world leader is complete unless until they talk about global warming, emission, and zero emission and whatnot. So what is happening? Because of this, the investors all over the world had started looking at ESG also. Now you have two choices. Either you ignore them, then they ignore you. So if you don't want to be ignored by them, you ought to come to their terms. So we started, or rather India started on a very small note on BRR and expected that without a regulatory push, people will go to sustainability report and integrated reporting. But in India, nothing moves unless until there is a hunter on you. So only few companies out of my team will tell me, but about 120, 140 companies are doing sustainability report or BR or integrated reporting. Rest are only happy with BRR, and that too in BRR, it's a very thing, the tick box approach. You have a policy, yes, I have a policy, but what do you about the policy? Nobody knows. So yes, we have for him the policy. So then what happened? A regulator is not only regulating, it's want the development of the market and all around development. So if you feel that India will be left alone without developing, then probably SEBI will have to wind this shop and say, no market, nothing to be done. So in order to keep everything alive and India being in the focus, SEBI had to do, if SEBI would not have done this, then probably 5 years down the line, people would be blaming that why FIIs are not coming, investments are not coming. Then you will say, probably SEBI was sleeping. So SEBI did not want to sleep, so they said, okay, if you are not doing it, I am going to push it. That is how you got. And then they said, I am giving you time, first voluntary and then compulsory. And few people like Conard realized and PK realized that yes, we got to do. And so they have started doing it even when this is not mandatory, even when it was not voluntary. So they started doing it. So I think that was a step which was required in order to keep Indian economy booming and FIIs and investment coming. Otherwise, there was no option.
But second part of my question was, how do you see this evolving? I mean, what next?
Again, once you realize, in life, the problem is that you don't see value in something unless until you are made to realize hard way. So, if the people start driving away from you, they don't want to invest in you, then you're lost. So if you have lost, then it becomes very difficult to get it. So it is a thing that a warning at this right time that if you do not adopt, if you do not evolve yourself to be a company which is ESG compliant or which is having a ESG focus, then probably you will be lost. So this is a step to that's why it's important.
So it's a bigger call. It's a bigger call for the country.
Futuristic call.
Agreed. So you did mention Conrad. Let me ask my next question to you. You, sir, your company has already disclosed BRSR now for 2 years. What was the rationale? Why did you make the early switch? And what are the challenges that the companies face?
Well, I think let's be clear. It was voluntary to some extent, but it was also directed by the requirements of your shareholders. And as you're aware, HDFC is one of the largest foreign shareholders, and therefore, I think almost 6-7 years back, we started getting questions on non-financial parameters. And I think the requirement that came up from these queries was that people were not looking at just your returns to shareholders, but looking at your returns to a broader universe called stakeholders. And therefore, so we looked around and we realized that globally people had moved at that point in time to the integrated report.
Yeah.
So the BRR was in place, but as Mr. Gupta said, it was a tick in the box. But it was not something that probably met the requirements of a global investor. So we started on an integrated report, maybe 5 or 6 years back. And interestingly, the first time I saw an integrated report was on a bank board I sit in Sri Lanka, which was a very brief one, but at least conceptually that's where we picked it up from. And we worked on it and we found that it met at least partially the requirements of the people who asked us these questions. And incrementally every year as we spoke to them, we noted down the new questions and started putting it together. And then of course the BRSR came, which we said is something more homegrown, something which is more domestic. And it has come from the regulators. And on the other side, you had the other requirement where shareholders linked to, we saw the alphabet soup there. So people would register with them and get them to do the survey.
Right.
And we used to get these formats to say, please fill it in and supply and give us. And the data requirements were either they were too onerous or also maybe not relevant. And I think the BRSR, in a sense, as we heard, has put together all the requirements, adapted it to local conditions. And therefore, when the first draft came, we started working on it as if this is something that we need to do and started building up. I would say we are still 50% there, but when it became voluntary, and I think it happened last May, just after our results, we had a draft in place and we said, let's release it anyhow. It's voluntary and no one's going to question us. And we have started incrementally. I think it's gone very well with investors.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus of investors for the first few years was on governance. And I think that's been addressed as you go along, and there are still a fair bit of standards which are kind of different from global expectations. But I guess that gets addressed in the essential and leadership part of the report. But today, when you look at it, I think sustainability has become a big buzzword. And as Mr. Gupta said, it's just an addition of a word, but a huge amount of incremental stuff. And just as what are the challenges we faced? Well, it was something new for all of us. None of us are experts. We had to, today to get that BRSR report, and ours is a very, very simple report relative to a Tata Steel, which is, much more complex. But even to get your data on energy consumption, it means somewhere in the middle of Guwahati, you have an office, you have to get that guy to give you the data on what he has consumed. So far, all he gave was, my electricity bill is 100 rupees and I paid it on time. But now you need to get the data on what is that consumption. So really, the BRSR really, for me, I think the biggest benefit has been it's a huge, huge team building exercise. Because you cannot do it alone. You cannot do it with a small group. Every single person across the organization has to provide data. So far, it was not standardized, but I guess now with the support of SES and NSC and the tools that are put together, it will be much easier to communicate what is required and easier to collate it. So I think that's a quick summary of.
So would that be your advice to the new companies that did not have the benefit of an FII oversight?
I think the job has been done of at least segregating, because when you look at the BRSR, the easy way to say is a lot of this does not apply.
Yeah.
But now that you have segregated into 38 subsectors, and if you're a chemical company, you know what's relevant to you. If you're a hospitality company, you know what is relevant to you. And I think this eliminates a lot of that confusion, especially we're not talking of a few companies or a handful, we're talking of 1,000 companies. Mm-hmm. And for many of them, I think this is their first venture into something like this. Now, interestingly, from a compliance point of view, many of the industries have these compliance requirements under local laws. It's just that it never came into the forefront, it never came as a part of your annual report. It came as more a compliance tick in the box or submission to your pollution board. Yeah. Today, it's a report to your shareholders. And I think what this tool probably gives you is what is the kind of data that needs to be put into the report and in what format it needs to be communicated.
Exactly.
So it cannot be too technical because the guys reading it are not technical people. But I think it's a good start, and this is really going to help people from my perspective, because I know people do talk to us and say, you all did it, how did you do it? but I said, you're a chemical industry, I have no clue what you need to report to. This will give you a clue. Or for example, I can read a Tata Steel report and understand nothing, since I'm not a technical person. Because their business is very, very different from ours. And for that matter, a hospitality guy is very different from, or a hotel is very different from a financial institution. So it's a very good, I think, analysis of the requirements sector-wise, which will enable these 1,000-odd companies to report in a much more easy way. Because at the end of the day, you also want to ensure that you use your time efficiently.
Absolutely.
These are one of the many reports that you're going to do, and therefore collate it in a simplistic manner and in a way which is easily read by whoever has to see it.
I couldn't agree more. Kudos to Mr. Gupta. Good effort, sir. My next question to PK. PK, your company also came out with the BRSR report, and especially you're in a sector where the ESG, E becomes fairly important. What were some of the issues you faced in bringing out a BRSR?
Okay, so I don't want to get into the technicality of whether it's BRSR or IR or a sustainability reporting based on GRI. At the end of the day, these are reporting formats. What's more important, I think, to discuss is most of these formats are actually driving the managements and boards to relook at their business models, to relook at the purpose of the corporation. Reporting is just an outcome of what you do inside the corporation.
Absolutely.
So what's important is what's happening inside the corporations, how are managements, is the board looking at of the management in making sure they use resources not just for the benefit of one particular stakeholder, but for the benefit of all stakeholders. I think what's important to understand is the very fundamental shift of purpose of corporation has changed. So for decades and decades, probably for almost a century, we thought the purpose of corporation is to create value for shareholders. Yeah. And from there, you actually are now speaking about stakeholder value creation. So I think that's the fundamental change that has happened. And second fundamental change that has happened is actually the way managements and boards are looking at value creation. We were stuck for maybe few decades or even few years with a 90-day kind of a reporting framework. We have that framework even today, but you have now a lot of global leaders, starting from Paul Polman of Unilever to Larry Fink of BlackRock, coming out and speaking about long-term capital deployment, long-term value creation. And I think from a very short-term, excessive short-term focus, today we are speaking about long-term, not just 3 years, 5 years, but we are actually today speaking about commitments that we are making for 2035, 2050, 2070. So you can see the shift, and we've seen it because we've all been there. If you really, kind of rewind the clock to 1995 to 2000 to 2005 to 2010, I mean, people used to really be excessively focused on the quarterly results. Yeah. Today, you really feel, okay, let's look at it from a medium to long term, okay? And why is that important? Because I think people have realized that you just cannot focus on one particular stakeholder, but you need to actually win the trust of all of the stakeholders. For example, if you take manufacturing units like, companies like Tata Steel, it's not just sufficient for you to have a regulatory license from the government of India to operate a plant. At the end of the day, you operate a plant within a vicinity where there is community. So obviously you need social license to operate. You need to take the community along with you. You need to take your employees along with you. You need to take your suppliers along with you, and you need to take your customers along with you. So we are actually looking at, again, shift in the purpose from being very shareholder-centric to probably very inclusive growth kind of an approach. So all of these fundamental changes in the governance landscape actually is now kind of pushing corporations to think beyond what was a very compliance-driven exercise to a very governance, holistic-based, comprehensive kind of reporting framework. Reporting framework is ultimately what you do, you report. You cannot be reporting what you don't do. So what's actually important is to do. Then comes reporting, whether you follow BRSR, IR, some other format, doesn't really matter. So I think net, 2-3 things. For any corporation to be sustainable, and sustainability in terms of business operations, sustainability in terms of its reputation, sustainability in terms of its credibility, and sustainability in terms of time frame. For example, corporations like HDFC, Tata Steel, Birlas, they've all existed for decades and centuries. Why is that? Because sustainability is infinite. It's just that they may not have reported in a particular moment, but it's already there. Otherwise, none of these corporations would exist. It's not easy for a corporation to exist for 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. Sustainability is not within its DNA. It's not its DNA. That's another fact. That's another issue. But it's already there. So it's not that, at least I'm not a very strong proponent to say that something new has come. No, I think all of this was there, whether it's risk management, whether it is strategy, whether it is value creation, whether it is ethics, whether it is employee welfare. I think in some form, all of these was there in most of these corporations. It's just that now we've got a template in which we are actually putting and showcasing it to the external world. That's what is happening. And I think it's good because external world now gets to know which are those companies who have some of these strong processes embedded within their business operations, and companies that don't gets kind of, demarcated. And probably it's good because companies which have and which are able to showcase probably will be valued more. Employees would look at joining those companies. Customers would want to do business with those companies. Suppliers would want to do business with those companies. NSC, BSC, SEBI will treat those companies with respect than the rest of the crowd. So I guess that's where it is. As far as challenges are concerned, all of the businesses, whichever way you run, has challenges, but every challenge actually brings out an opportunity. So more than challenge, I think it's a great opportunity because you're not just looking at shareholder, you're looking at your employee welfare, you're looking at giving products and services to customers which are extremely sustainable, you're looking at the welfare of your suppliers, and of course you're thinking of the environment. You pass on a better, planet to the next generation. So I think it's a great opportunity than a challenge. Thank you.
I mean, very well put. I think there are several takeaways from what you just said. I mean, clearly we moved away quite a bit from Friedman's shareholder capitalism. We have moved away meaningfully now. A lot is spoken about stakeholder capitalism. There's a lot that gets to be spoken about how a corporation should be seen as its, as a responsible corporate player in the society. And one needs to go no further than Tata Steel. I think several of us from our childhood would remember the Tata Steel ad. We also make steel. So but what I also take from what you just said is these reports, if done properly, also hold up a mirror for the management to see what they're doing. And so all of those things have been there, as you rightly pointed out. But this is one consolidated place. Conrad also pointed out where you actually get to see all the stuff that your company is doing and where you stand in the large ecosystem and whether it is sustainable or not. So let me then segue to the next question, which is on on global practices. Diksha, this question to you. What's your take on the BRSR's balanced approach? We saw this alphabet soup, right? Balanced approach to based on being a combination of the best global reporting practices and frameworks.
So I would build on what he just said, that, the reporting has been happening now, especially at the bigger corporates, for example, a little bit different from what HDFC and Tata Steel spoke about. I'm representing the group. So, for us, many of our listed and even non-listed companies have been reporting for more than a decade, whether it's Hindalco, Ultratech, Birla Carbon, our carbon black business, which is not listed, Novelis. All of them have now been reporting for more than a decade. A couple of them have been doing integrated reports. So, in different, and actually interestingly, Novelis, which is our downstream aluminium company, with operations in Americas and Europe and China and Korea, so those countries, they operate in continents and countries. They started with a GRI report, and 3 years back started to do what we're calling a purpose report. that are we living to the purpose that we've set for ourselves? Novelis's purpose is shaping sustainable world together. So if we've said we exist to shape a sustainable world together, it brings in all those that we are shaping. So it's an action word. So we do. Sustainable, so which is a combination of that, and to put it, one of the things that we're talking about, that, sustainability is a word which has been used and abused, if I may say, that, everybody's made their own interpretation of it. We are saying sustainability for us means, are we able to sustain? Will we be around as a corporate in times to come? So sustainable means will you be there, and together, so all stakeholders together. And this therefore started to report to say that for us, sustainability as a downstream aluminium company means, aluminium, so therefore a lot of energy consumption, so decarbonization. And therefore all investment decisions, and you would see that in the last few big investments that Novelis has announced and made are around recycling. That, the plants that we've set up are aluminium recycling plants. So that's one end of this thing, and therefore to build on his point that it is about what you do, and reporting gets you to talk about what you do. And you talked about it as a mirror. I would say it's a two-way mirror, because when you are doing a report, whether it's in what was IR, and now of course IR, SASB, all of it is kind of come together, and the exposure draft of IISB is there, which is going to again create. So in terms of reporting framework, sometimes I feel we're just playing this catch-up game. By the time you figure that, how do you move from GRI-based reporting to IR, you have BRSR and you have an ISSP facing you. So those are there. But if a corporate has identified that basis the key stakeholders for me, whether it's the people who are investing in me or lending to me, so that community, regulators, customers, employees, communities, suppliers, so all kinds of, if we through that assessment, we figured that in terms of environment, these are the expectations, social, these are the expectations, the way we conduct ourselves, these are the expectations. Then you would have, because once you say this issue is material to me, that, as a cement company operating in, using limestone and making cement, decarbonization is important, then you would have also talked about what does it mean to decarbonize. That, these are the actions, these are the roadmaps, these are the KPIs, this is how it will be over a period of time. When you know actions, you know actors, that who's going to be responsible, which are the partnerships. So all the basic information is in place, and then it is about presenting in that format. One thing which has also helped us in these, in various these companies that we've been reporting, is to use a data management platform. We use Enablon as a data management system. So as, the fundamental KPIs, if we've picked up according to, say, a GRI, then it is all in place. Navneet used that example of water. So, in water, it is then all about how much of it, from where did it come, what did you do with it, did you, fully recycle it, did you discharge it somewhere, if you discharge it, what ultimately happened to it, or what is the risk that you're going to have, if we've been talking about from, say, TCFD perspective, I quite like how TCFD talks about risk. So it allows you to think of overall approach from ecological footprint, that physical risk, that will you have enough of the resources available to you, and then transition risk, that who all will kind of, if we are transitioning, whether it's from carbon perspective or from water perspective or, becoming nature positive, you know, these are the kind of actors who would want to know more. So transition perspective. So I think that's where I would leave it at, that when you know what are the issues that you're addressing in the context of those 38 subsectors, this has been there, and I think it's very helpful because that's how rating agencies look at you to say that if you are a non-ferrous precious metal, so then these are the things that we are looking for you to be addressing and disclosing. And if you know that this is what people want to kind of, this is the expectation of stakeholders for you to disclose. And then I talked about the two-way mirror, that inside we are able to say, look, we need to, if our rating or if our, whether it's qualitative or quantitative feedback that you're getting is showing this, we need to ask ourselves, are we not performing or are we not communicating on how we are performing? So looking for those two kinds of gaps and then work on it accordingly.
How far would guides like the ones we saw now go in helping companies towards meeting these?
So I think one thing which kind of caught my this thing was, it's very helpful that it's bringing all kinds of framework expectations in one place. And I would kind of keep it separate. So while I saw CDP and DJSI being written in the same line as GRI, TCFD, we would keep it a little bit separate. So some are reporting frameworks, and some of them are assessment frameworks in that sense. If we just stay with only reporting frameworks, at least this would make it very easy to say that, am I missing anything? And if, so I have everything covered, am I acting on them? So do I have targets? Do I have roadmaps to meet those targets? Have we made, made action plans to kind of, action on those roadmaps? So it allows you to see everything in a single place, and it doesn't feel that much of an alphabet soup, for want of any other word. Yeah. Thank you.
Diksha. My next question to Conrad again. What would be your take on the need for adapting, these best global practices we've seen across so many standards, reporting frameworks that Disha talked about, to local demographics? How do these things change? I mean, to what extent would such adaptation be needed?
No, like I think, as I mentioned, each of these frameworks are built up in a certain geography for the needs of a certain segment. And just blindly adapting that to local conditions does have challenges. The first big challenge you may have is just want of data. And therefore, I think the BRSR, in a sense, is taking into consideration all these local challenges and saying, okay, as an essential report, this is what can be done. Now, you can step up your ante and try to achieve even more to global, and that's where the leadership issues come in, where if you have the data, and maybe you may not have it today, but then it also says that the rest of the world does report in this format, the rest of the world collects it. So you start looking at your internal processes, your internal data collection, your internal adaptability to it, and build up. So maybe not immediately, but 1, 2, 3 years you will. And I guess when you're looking at a competitive world, people are no longer just going to evaluate you based on your profits. These are parameters also which become evaluation. So if your peers are doing it, there is no reason why you cannot do it. And I think that itself makes all the companies that much more valuable. The other point which I would like to add is that increasingly especially over the last 1 year, in our interactions with investors, two questions have come up repeatedly. One is that, is there board oversight over this entire process? Do you have a board-related committee? And that's becoming critical. And secondly, is the CEO compensation, does it have an ESG parameter for his evaluation? So really what they are saying is this is no longer the job of a department which reports to the world and the management and the board don't care. This is board driven. They have to take ownership. And like I said, the whole organization has to work towards this activity just like you work towards your profitability.
It's absolutely the right thing to sort of look at. In fact, we're probably moving to what you mentioned, from a reporting framework to an assessment framework, isn't it? I mean, as our reporting gets better, as companies report better and better data, that data gets assimilated better by their shareholders, and therefore the companies are then held up to a higher standard of excellence.
Both within and outside, because I think that's what I heard both of them talk about, to say that because many of these things, while to the external world it's this one company, but internally many of these actions or decisions are taken by different people within the ExCom or Mancom or whatever you may call it. So this gets everyone to kind of, come together to say, how do I, what role do I play? So therefore you can no longer be that this is that department's job to just say, and I think, BRSR would contextualize it to Indian, this thing, but IR did a fantastic job of that. It made you realize that you cannot have that manufactured capital without that intellectual capital, which resides with the human capital. So, a lot of that, this thing, it kind of links up and makes it a collaborative, initially forced, and then I think slowly it becomes easier. But everyone realizes that I have a role to play and I need to own it. And you can't just say, tum report banao, and it'll be seen. It's a reflection of how you are thinking, how you're strategizing, how you're going to deliver what you've said you will deliver, and at what cost.
So I won't play devil's advocate for a little bit. I've heard only one side of the argument. What's the rise in cost of compliance with BRR and BRSR? Mr. Gupta mentioned initially, so there is a nudge. He also said that if you don't do it, foreign investors may not come. There is also a worry that companies will find it difficult to raise capital in the global markets. Like I said, I was mentioning to I was referring to those, I was alluding to those ticks in the box that used to happen when the BRR framework was there. And now we are getting better and better. You say most companies in India are looking at this aspect from this prism?
One other comment to add. So I guess, again, See, this is what happens when you have a set format and the format coming through a regulatory intervention. The moment something like this comes through a regulatory intervention, people will immediately kind of categorize that to mean as a compliance department's job. Then you actually have lost the game. So, in my view, for a long-term perspective, some of these interventions, particularly governance-related, ethics, compliance, sustainability, climate change, these interventions are best actually left as a comply or explain structure than making it mandatory. The moment you make it mandatory, people will say, oh, this is coming through LODR, that means the company secretary is the compliance officer, he will take care. So you actually at times lose sight of the actual objective of why somebody is asking you to report. The point is not about reporting. It's not about whether you filled in 40-page report or a 60-page report. It's about somebody else knowing, oh, what have you done during the entire year, so that I get to know how you're using all of the resources that's available to you and trying to create value and a better world for the future. Again, reporting structures and formats are to be used carefully. It is only a guide for you to know, okay, these are the components that I need to keep in mind. If you excessively kind of depend on a format or a disclosure interventions, you will actually miss the bus, because in 2008, when subprime crisis happened, I mean, particularly in the US, the SEC felt, oh, the companies are taking a lot of risks and they're not letting investors know about risk. Then they made it mandatory. And from 2010 onwards, if you see the 10Ks, you have 100 pages of risk factors. The risk factors would say the sky can come down, the earth can shatter, my CEO may just collapse while he is playing tennis. So you are left with so much of information overload that the investor is no better off. So I guess some of these formats, than looking at it as a compliance-driven exercise or a compliance cost, it's actually an investment. And it's actually what people are trying to tell the management or the board is probably have a different mindset on how you are going to use resources, because all of us agree resources are scarce. So with less, how can you create more value and not damage the stakeholders? I think that's the message that needs to go out, and that's the message all of us have to take from BRR, not just the tables, the vertical lines, the horizontal lines, what's put there, and what they've kind of come up with.
I agree. I mean, as Conrad rightly pointed out, look at the return of this particular investment that has been put in.
The larger substance is more important.
I have a question for you. See, ISSB is coming up with its own comprehensive baseline, global baseline sustainability disclosures, which would encompass reporting compliances of, and I'm beginning, SASB, CDP, TCFD, CDSB, etc. How would this framework affect the evolution of the BRSR framework? You know, how can listed entities better cope up with such frequent changes?
See, as I said in my initial talk, that unfortunately no disclosure of the ESG, whether it in India, US, UK or anywhere, has come to a stage of Qutub Minar. So everything is dynamic. So that is the biggest problem which everybody is facing, not only HDFC or Tata Steel, but SES also, because today we make a format and we say that this is our evaluation model. 15 days later it changes. Not only that, the organizations are merging. SASB has merged with something, that other organization has merged with something. So this is so dynamic that it is very difficult to predict. But sum and substance of all that is there, and I agree with PK, that everything everybody is doing. But why format and something? So I would say, one is the doing it, then measuring it, reporting it, then benchmarking or evaluating. That is the fourth thing that any format is going to do. And the fifth thing that I do, that it makes you create a policy. Because when you have done it, measured it, reported it, benchmarked it, then you have seen somewhere else, and then you find that, like, iski sari meri sari se white zyada kyun hai? Then you compare, okay, why my emission is more than that emission. So then you start, so you get into a loop of excellence. So that loop of excellence is going to drive to your better excellence. The problem, as I say, that Conrad is very right. He said he sees it important. It is not a compliance. But I wish 1,000 listed company or 1,500 listed company had that mindset.
I agree.
Unfortunately, my fingers are more than the number of companies in that grade, that who thinks this is not a cost. The problem is everybody sees, and PK is very right. The moment SEBI says, then it goes into the compliance dustbin. That I will say compliance dustbin because then somebody has to clean the dustbin and do it.
PK also said every challenge provides
Yes,
an opportunity.
So I'm saying, so the issue is this, that everyone must have to realize, it's like this, that when I buy a house, I have to pay EMI, it troubles me. So, but do I stop buying a house because EMI is troubling me? Because it's a necessity for me. I see value in long term for it. So every action, when you say, you got to see whether it is going to create a value for me or not. Because otherwise what happens, if you don't do this, you are not aware where do you stand, what you can do better. So that is why. Now I would always say that ideally it should be voluntary. But then I always give an example. If you look at the Companies Act, there is a code of conduct for directors, independent directors. Now most of the independent directors are past 60. Now it is like telling a 60-year-old that how do you brush your teeth? Because the code of conduct. Now I have been 60 years doing conduct, but then some failures are there that you have not been performing what you were supposed to do, then I got to write it. So if everybody was doing voluntarily, probably SEBI would not be working on BRSR format, and neither NSE would be requiring, and I would not be here.
I suppose we are moving in the right direction though.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Diksha, you had some thoughts on this.
It is exactly what he was saying, that while, you know, companies like HDFC, Tata Steel and some of the Birla Group companies would look at it as that it's essential for our, you know, doing well in times to come or continuing to do well in times to come. But then there are companies which would think of it as compliance, and they would be feeling that there is a cost to that compliance. Whether, you know, I can think of some of our customers are MSMEs, or some of the suppliers are MSMEs, or even referring to the table that they've prepared in the this thing, that, you know, some who've not done BRR for the first time, or have been doing only BRR as a tick box exercise, they would indeed find and cost of compliance in two ways. One is the reporting itself, and also because it shows them that if, you know, earlier you could gloss over a few things, but when it's now a very comprehensive framework, you could not have had, you know, I mean, if the energy cost is this much, then your carbon footprint cannot be low. So there are a lot of these linkages that a format like an IR or BRSR provides, that it's very easy for an aware reader of the report to figure out if you've glossed over something. So it'll force some of these companies to think and present more carefully than what they've been doing. And I think that's the real value of these newer, more comprehensive frameworks, that it allows to connect the dots. Earlier, somebody would have had to be very smart to first sit with the annual report and sustainability report, and then make those, such formats makes that connect for the reader. So I think that would be, for me, that's the biggest plus of a format like this.
Thank you. I would now move on to questions. You know, before I move on to next set of questions for me, any questions from the audience?
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, all of you. So, I am Manish from Kansai Nerolac, and my question to the panel is about how are you engaging on sustainability with the value chain partners? So, just now Diksha spoke of MSME customers, suppliers, and typically for manufacturing companies, even for services, if you see, typically we may make our house in order, but when I go to my value chain, I find it a lot of different situation altogether. Now, this is journey. This is not something that you can achieve in same day. But then, how do you embark on the journey? What are the good practices you have undertaken? What has been your experience? And somewhere, maybe at some point of time, we'll also see those, our supply chain partners in line with, what the expectations are. So, any insights and feedback experience about that?
Very fair question. It's part of the BRSR principles. Who would like to field this question?
I can take a shot and then, So what we are doing, and I would answer it in two parts. What we are seeing as suppliers, because we are suppliers, many of the, whether it's in the textile value chain businesses that we are in, or, we sell carbon black to tire companies, which ultimately sell to automobile companies. So there are three ways in which this is happening. One is through use of tools, for example, EcoVadis, or for example, using the CDP supplier questionnaire to say that CDP becomes more only from carbon perspective versus EcoVadis asks you for broader, more E, but a little bit on SNG data as well. So use of tools. Then we are also doing the supplier sustainability assessment depending on the majority of the organization, our ABG company. These assessments we do on our suppliers as well, and then support them on at least technically on what all changes that they could be making. So I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair question to ask, and frankly, I think now it's no more a best practice. If you have to be sustainable, you must make sure that your stakeholders are also sustainable. It's not that your stakeholders can fall off and you can be sustainable. That's not going to work anymore. Because while you need to disclose, you need to do the work. And one of the disclosures which I'm sure is captured in the 38 kind of categories that SES has done is disclosure on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. While scope 1 is what you directly kind of can control, scope 2, at least scope 3 is what you're talking about. So if you have to disclose on scope 3 emissions and look good, and year on year, kind of bring it down, you obviously have to engage with your vendor partners, make sure that you have a meaningful dialogue with the vendor partners, make them sustainable so that you can be sustainable, and of course pass on all of the business, models and technologies and whatnot, so that they can be sustainable and then you can look better. If that doesn't happen, probably you'll walk away from doing business with them like your customers would walk away from you. So I think it's now more an imperative than feel-good factor.
Conrad, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, we are probably not in manufacturing, but I think in our own sense. For example, we deal with developers. Yeah. And therefore ensuring that at least today it's being done for the larger projects, and I guess in due course of time it will go across the board. But when an environmental and social assessment has become almost mandatory for large projects, because slowly your lenders are insisting on it and you need to give it. So it's, like I said, it's no longer a compliance cost, it's a business cost. So for example, whether the health and safety measures for labor at a construction site, whether there's a crash for the children of construction workers, these are all becoming part of the lending business as compared to the past, where all I did was give money to a developer and saw that he paid the money back. So you're getting into projects, you're getting into health and safety of labor. These are issues which probably as a lender, one would never look at in the past. So in our own way, and I'll give you a small example of the commercial market, the commercial real estate market. I don't think there's any mandatory requirement to have a green building. But when we look at our portfolio, almost 70%, and I would say it's increasing, are green buildings. We have never insisted on it. But why they have to do it is because if they have to get top-notch global banks and corporates to be part of as tenants, that's a basic requirement for the business. So you can look at it as a regulatory requirement, but actually they're doing it to enhance the value of the project and get top quality. So I think the point that PK made was you either use it as a part of your business or you will get left out at some stage.
I would say that you got to look at it as a total value chain. And if any link in the value chain is weak, the chain is going to break. So you got to look into each of the elements of the value chain and make them sustainable.
So hello, this is Anis from Siemens. Just to add to what question my friend here asked was again on the value chain partner. So Diksha, you did mention about the upstream side of the value chain. My question is on the downstream side, how do you also look at a customer? I mean, you get your top line from them. How do you also assess that element? And again, that is one part, and adding to that, maybe all of you could look at what is the view about scope 4 now? Is there also some thought on those lines? So 2 questions. Thank you.
Yeah. No, so I mean, totally agree. While you do not, the kind of relationship that you would have with a customer very different from this thing. So how we are looking at it is through what we are calling the concept of product stewardship or the services stewardship. That are we developing products which would, reduce the risk or enhance the opportunities that our customers have. Some of them coming from them, for example, when we are making viscose staple fiber and it is coming from, so it's a virgin material in that sense, that wood and then pulp and then this thing. So we are now saying that we now have a brand called Liva Reviva, where we have mixed fiber made from old garments, so to offer circular products, or in Birla Carbon to say that this is made from virgin materials, but then we have a brand called Continua, which is carbon black made from old tires. So therefore, working with, or for that matter, Novelis, 62% of the aluminium that Novelis currently uses is from recycled this thing. So working with a JLR or a Ford to make a vehicle jointly. So working in partnership with customers, some of the nudge coming from them and some of it we offering the whole product stewardship thing. And to scope 4, one of my favorite things that, to talk about, to say that are we making products which would allow somebody else? And it's very, very relevant to India as a country because we will have reliance on coal as a fuel for some time to come. So therefore, how do we work towards to say that we are making products at least in such a way that would allow the ecological footprint to be reduced? The clothes, I've not even made it sustainably, but it is a product which when you use it will be more sustainable as compared to the alternatives that you have.
Yeah, so speaking about steel industry or metals and mining, I think whether it doesn't matter, actually, if you have to be sustainable, as Mr. Gupta said, the chain has to be completely strong. So whether it's upstream, downstream, it doesn't matter. For us, if you really see the inputs come, which is the inbound logistics, processing, the outbound logistics, the customer. So you cannot have either of the links weak, because at the end of the day, if either of the links are weak, you are weak. So it becomes imperative on everybody. Actually, everybody has to change. That's the beauty of this game. It's not that one of you has to change. Everybody has to change. And everybody will be forced to change, because if the vendor is not up to the mark, you won't do business. If you're not up to the mark, customer won't do business. And at the end of the day, every vendor is a customer to somebody, and every customer is again a vendor. So whichever way you look, it's a complete full circle. So that's where I think people are talking about 2035, 2040, 2050, and even 2070 because it's not easy to get everybody's thought process and business processes aligned. So it takes few decades. Hopefully when we reach 2050 and we are there, we will look back and see whether this is, this is true.
Any other questions? Well, I had a question actually. I mean, Conrad, you mentioned earlier on about the role played by investors. What's the sense of, some AMCs, asset management companies now look at fiduciary role, and what is their, we have a stewardship code for them as well. Can you just tell us about some of the role played by this segment of our market, the shareholders, in helping towards stakeholder capital?
No, I think, to be fair, I think they have had a big role to play. So, all these companies, the bigger companies, because of global exposures, I don't think, yes, to some extent, we understood the implications and did a lot of this to be at the top of the pile. But also, we get a lot of inputs from our shareholders who are, talking to you about not only your ability to deliver, but also talking about best practices and you trying to adapt them based on a global model. Because a lot of these global investors are actually investing in multiple different jurisdictions. And whether it was governance, whether it is the S part or even the E part, they are actually coming and sharing best practices, and you're trying, and today your top 20, 30, 50 companies want to be best in class compared globally, not just locally. And I think there is a big role to play. Now, to look at it on the other side, sometimes they can be in a preaching mode because quite often, they're trying to use a framework and say you need to comply with that. So you also have to be very clear what can be done and what cannot be done. And I think therefore from a corporate point of view, you listen to them, commit to what is within your ability, and be very upfront and say this is not possible or it can happen over a period of time. And just one more point I would like to make is that because this has become mandatory, I think the whole benefit of what we are talking and the value created for a company will go away if it's looked at as a tick in the box and next year you get about 1,000 brochures, which actually are called BRSRs. Because what's going to happen is then companies are going to outsource it to agencies who will come with a very fancy report, which is not necessarily owned by the company. So I guess what is important is in due course of time, I don't know what is the time frame, but as we see that companies have stabilized on the reporting, we get to a stage where there is an external assurance given to say that this is data which is accurate and it is not a marketing tool or a marketing brochure where commitments are made or numbers which are put out cannot be validated.
We have to be cautious about that one. Any other questions?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Priya and I'm from State Bank of India. I would like to ask one question from D'Souza sir. So you have been publishing your sustainability report as per BRSR. My concern over this environment disclosure is that where banks are concerned, so how can we really quantify the data which is related to water consumption and waste management, considering that we are totally into banking and we are not consuming a lot of water and waste we are not generating up to that level. So first is how exactly we need to quantify it. Then second is that at what level can we stop, because in banks we have our branches, our ATMs and our extension counters till the across the country. So we can quantify the waste and the water for big offices, but for a person who is sitting in Leh or any remote location, so we cannot ask that branch to give us the waste management data or the water consumption data.
See, I think
I'm Shyam from State Bank of India. I would like just to what Priya had, I'll just continue from where she stopped. Because just like you had mentioned with regard to financing of the greenfield projects, wherein a financial institution can support the sustainability of the environment by financing the greenfield projects. Being in the financial sector, how best a financial entity can contribute to the sustainability part of the environment, wherein a manufacturing organization or a mining organization, they have got scope for giving back to the environment. Whereas in the case of financial sector entity or any service oriented industries, what best can be given back to the environment?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think it's a valid point because, when you look at energy consumption or water consumption, as a financial institution. So what we have done really is to look at it for our own branches. Yes, it's going to be, for State Bank, given the size of the bank, it's going to be tough. But something which is very basic and, it may look, there's no rocket science. And I gave the exemption of an electricity bill. Today, all our databases actually capture the month, the amount to be paid, and whether that is paid. What we will all need to do, and we have done it recently, is make it simple for that guy sitting in Leh to update the data and work on getting that information at a central level so that there's no incremental work. So now, for example, when our guys update the electricity bill, they also put the units consumed. As basic as that. It's very small. But when we tried doing it for the past, we had a nightmare. Because for that guy, that's the work, he's got enough of work to do. This is not important. So I think what helped us big time is the COVID period, which meant everyone was connected on Teams. And therefore, you could put 40 guys on screen together and talk to them rather than talking to each one individually. But these are basic challenges. And it's not easy. And that's why I said it's a huge building of teamwork, a huge building of explaining to the guy in Leh what is the meaning of this information and how important it is, but also putting your processes and systems in place. As far as, projects are concerned, as you build on the expertise, you will end up with having certain benchmarks and, then you say, okay, these are benchmarks below which I will not even consider a finance. So yes, there are certain parameters of environment requirements, certain social requirements. These are the ENS assessments that any lending institution will be required to do in due course of time, probably across the board for all. So there will be a kind of rating. Again, I don't think the lender will be capable of doing it. It's not in their expertise. There will be agencies which will be specialized in providing the rating. So it's just like today when you invest in a bond, you depend on what is the rating of that bond, which is an independent rating, to take that decision. Similarly, your ENS, in fact, in real estate, we already have 3-4 of them who actually do the ENS assessment, which is different from us doing it ourselves, and give us a kind of feedback. And I guess these are things which will build up. So it's a whole ecosystem which will build up in due course of time. But I think it's a great start, and it's a necessity for I think all stakeholders. So, but as a financial institution, something as basic as water, you'll have to collect water consumption in the format required. And therefore, I'm very keen to see the SES break up, because probably the moment I get out of here, and I'm going to ask Mr. Gupta to let me know what is required for a financial institution, because when you look at the original one, there are a lot of stuff which we can say not applicable and say we have complied with.
So I just had one comment on what you asked. While I am not an expert in telling you how you should compute, but if you really look at the global data, see, these problems are of countries. So countries have taken a target, and these targets percolate down to corporations. If you look at the most kind of expected, the expectations from the industries, it's actually not on financial services. It's actually on metals and mining, chemicals, oil and gas, construction. So if you really look at, these are the industries which have to really do well for countries to achieve their targets. If you really look at financial services, they actually are either at the center or towards almost at the left. What's expected is some of these large industries which needs to really deliver on the commitments. Only then will the country needle move, otherwise it doesn't.
I will add. See, when you have a problem, you can't tackle the problem as a whole. You got to act by part. As I tell my team in my office, whenever we discuss and they try to mix 2 or 3 issues, I said, learn to create a chair or a table. All the 4 legs of the chair are not fit once. You start fixing one leg, another leg. Second thing is this is an opportunity for banks to evaluate how HDFC Bank is better or worse than me. What is their consumption of electricity? You can see if you have got, State Bank has got 12,000 plus branches or maybe 16,000 now after the merger of associate banks. Now you see that a branch in a small town consumes more electricity than a branch in the bigger town, then you know something is wrong. So all these data can be used. It's not, that's what I'm saying, that it is not a compliance. It is an evaluation of your own efficiency. Water, on face of it, you can't do anything for water because people will drink water, people will go to toilet. But when you have a bigger branches, you can have a water harvesting system. You can have a water recycling system. So it is not an issue that you cannot do something. You got to divide the problem into small. Maybe out of the 16,000 branches, 15,500 branches or 15,900 branches wouldn't need any water harvesting. But 100 branch will need. Our corporate office in Nariman Point may need. So all these things have to be done. So never approach the ghost as a whole. Break it into a small part.
Any other questions? So, at the end of a panel discussion, I can summarize the discussion or I can take the liberty of asking each one of my fellow panelists about their comments. Can I do that? So I think from our panelists, one point is fairly clear. There is no if, it's only a question of when. The problem is serious enough and there is cognizance of it, and this is not a cost. This has to be seen as an investment. I'm just taking bits from what my panelists just spoke. You have to see it as an investment and you have to see a long-term return. And the move from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism is real and here to stay. And however, you do need a nudge from the regulator, as we have seen, and these nudges go a better way, go a long way towards making making the corporate shine better, not just in terms of its long-term returns, but also for its investors. And therefore it then becomes a better player in the universe that I spoke about. People have moved away from Friedman, as I did. And in doing so, you need guides like what SES governance has just done. You need frameworks. There are several frameworks. We had, as Navneet said, alphabet soup. You need people to make sense of it. There is an entirely discussion that we did not have right now about the dearth of talent in this space. I presume that is something that needs to be looked at closer as well. But I think guides like what SES governance has just put out go a long way in making this arcana, understandable, plausible, and for companies to come up. This year it is voluntary. From next year it's going to become mandatory. Let's see how we move away from BRR ticks to actually quantifiable XBR readable answers, reports, which will move from, as Diksha pointed out, a reporting framework to an assessment framework where we actually will start assessing it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Once again, NSE is grateful to all the learned panelists for sharing their thoughts on the topic, which is of paramount importance in today's time. To commemorate the event, NSE has planted grove of trees under the project name Trees for Tigers at Ramtek in Maharashtra. This brings us to the last part of the program. To express our gratitude, a token of appreciation shall be presented to the panelists. I invite Avishkar Nayak, Head Listing Compliance, to present the token to our panelists, please. To JNG, sir. To Mr. Conrad D'Souza. To Ms. Diksha Vats. To Mr. PK. Thank you, Avishkar. I would now like to invite Ms. Priya Subbaraman, Chief Regulatory Officer, NSE, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, and thank you all for your participation today. No event can be successful without people who dedicate their resources and time, and I take this opportunity to acknowledge everybody's efforts. Navneet's presentation brought to our attention the hours of work that has been poured in making these guides. I think you mentioned, I couldn't even calculate the man hours actually. You said 7 people, 24/7, 8 months. I just, at some point in time, it was like, yeah, it is, I know.
I'm a slave driver.
As our MD said, the guide actually covers 38 subsectors and significant body of work, and therefore we thank SES and Mr. Gupta for partnering with NSE on this initiative. We also want to thank our panelists, Mr. D'Souza, Ms. Watts. Mr. Ryan, I think I'm the only person who's going to get your name right. Kachinadam. And of course, my colleague, Tirthankar. I am not going to talk about Mr. Gupta again, but thank you all very much. I think the question answers were were incisive and very perspective questions and answers. So I for one enjoyed this session very, very much. So thank you on behalf of all the other people that are attending as well. I just want to also acknowledge our corporate communications team and who had a hand in making the final product, and our administration team who's actually put everything together. And lastly, my team members, Avishkar, Lokesh, Zareen, and everybody else who contributed a lot to make this event successful. The integrated guide will be available on our website, as we just said. And we are also planning to send the guide. We're doing some amount of work to make sure to sort of say that this guide should go to this company, essentially taking into account what your industry is. So you should expect to see an email and a communication in NEEPS shortly. So thank you all again, and please join us for dinner. Thank you very much.
हाँ लीजिए ना